Dear Patriots, before the news starts, please subscribe to our patriotic channel by clicking the subscribe button. Give us a thumbs up to this video. Don't forget to leave your opinion below in the comments section. Share the news on Facebook and Twitter so you friends see it. Thank you.
Trump After Dark, the Big Gun Edition. President Donald Trump's most daring foreign policy gamble reverberated today, as diplomats, world observers and the political class picked over his willingness to meet with North Korean leader Kim Jong Un. Yesterday's stunning announcement that Trump had accepted an invitation to meet with a man he's derided as a little rocket man shook the world. It was also, as Politico's Michael Crowley explains, classic Trump. A bold move, a willingness to say the things others wouldn't, do the things they didn't dare. Trump's taboo-breaking instinct was most recently on clear display in his December decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Trump officials say, previous leaders' unwillingness to do so, was a key factor behind the president's thinking, something he made clear in a December 6 statement from the White House. While previous presidents have made this a major campaign promise, they failed to deliver, Trump said. Today, I am delivering. Of course, there was another component that was classic Trump, confusion. The shocking announcement from a South Korean official on Thursday was followed, today, by a White House that seemed to be retreating, at least somewhat. The White House appeared to set tougher conditions for a meeting between President Donald Trump and the North Korean leader, Kim Jong Un, saying that the North must take concrete steps toward denuclearizing. The White House also seemed to back away from the 2-month timeframe laid out by South Korean officials. Elsewhere in President Trump's orbit. Trump bomb, the economy added 313,000 jobs last month as the economy added the most jobs in a single month of the Trump's presidency. None your business. After theatrically promising in interviews to not respond to special counsel Robert Mueller's subpoena, former Trump aide Samuel Nunberg talked to a grand jury today. Gone quiet, even as a wave of leaks have hit his investigation, Mueller has remained silent, leaving Washington and Trump world to ponder a number of unknowns about his investigation. Trump rebate. The Trump Organization sent more than $150,000 to the Treasury, its profits from foreign governments' official use of Trump facilities. Climate change. White House Chief of Staff John Kelly vetoed an idea by EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt to stage a climate change debate, The New York Times reports. Developing story. President Trump pardoned a Navy submariner who was set to face prison time for taking a photograph of a classified engine room. Biden, his time? Former Vice President Joe Biden is looking at options to take on President Trump in 2020, including a potential presidential bid. Not Russian to help. Russian President Vladimir Putin said that Russians indicted in Mueller's investigation are not my problems. Stormy letter. The White House acknowledged that Trump lawyer Michael Cohen sent correspondence to adult film actress Stormy Daniels' legal team from a Trump.org email address per NPR. There you have it. You're caught up on the Trump administration. Happy Friday. Bernie Sanders campaigns in Trump country. Bernie Sanders is taking his pitch to Trump country. The Vermont senator is doing it entirely on his own terms, not as a proponent of National Democrats' strategies, or even often their candidates, out west. It's absolutely imperative that we get out to those states that Trump won, speak to the working people of those states, and make very clear that the campaign that Trump won on, where he promised to stand for working people, turned out to be a lie, Sanders told Politico in an interview Thursday, shortly before taking off for Texas and Arizona, 2 states the president carried by single digits in the 2016 presidential election. It's important to rally people around the progressive agenda, which says that we don't give tax breaks to billionaires, Sanders said, promising to add even more Trump voting states to his travel schedule. While the 2016, and possibly 2020, presidential candidate will be rallying with a pair of Arizona congressmen in Phoenix on Sunday, Most of his drip is focused on his own appearances rather than elevating other specific Democratic candidates. Just weeks after visiting Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, all of which voted for Trump in 2016, and Illinois, in part to back congressional candidates, Sanders is scheduled to appear at the South by Southwest Conference in Austin on Friday. He is then set to headline a rally put on by the political group spawned from his campaign, Our Revolution, in San Antonio later in the day, before speaking at another Our Revolution rally in Lubbock on Saturday. Then, in Arizona, he will appear with Reps. Raul Grijalva and Ruben Gallego. In Arizona, we've got two progressive members of Congress who I strongly support, but mostly what this is about is not just supporting individual candidates. It is getting people out and supporting voter turnout, he said, pointing to strong Democratic voter turnout numbers in Texas primaries on Tuesday. Accordingly, Sanders declined to comment in any details about either of the Democrats aiming to join him in the Senate by winning GOP-held seats in the two states. Sanders demurred when asked about Representative Beto O'Rourke, the Democrat challenging Senator Ted Cruz, who has captured the imagination of grassroots progressives hoping for a major upset. "I am not there to campaign for any particular candidate in this particular trip," he said. Sanders similarly batted away a question about Representative Kyrsten Sinema, the Democrat running to replace retiring Republican Senator Jeff Flake. Sinema is a member of the conservative Blue Dog Coalition who has publicly worried that her party is moving too far to the left while refusing to outright criticize Donald Trump, and dismissing favored Sanders policies like single-payer healthcare as unrealistic in recent news interviews. "My thought is none. I'm there for two congressmen who are progressives," Sanders said. "I'm not there on any Senate effort." Sanders is headed to two states that have been at the center of recent Democratic politics. In Texas, Tuesday's primaries showcased high levels of Democratic enthusiasm, but also tensions between some grassroots activists and Washington party leaders. In one case, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee dropped opposition research on Democratic candidate Laura Moser in an apparent effort to keep her out of the runoff in her congressional primary race in suburban Houston. Shortly thereafter, Moser, who had the backing of the local chapter of Our Revolution, and whose husband was a senior Sanders campaign aide, was endorsed by the National Our Revolution group. She wound up making it to the runoff with a second-place finish in the first round of voting. "I thought it was an outrage for the DCCC to do what they did," Sanders said. "I think the American people are profoundly disgusted by the level of negativity and ugliness that we see in campaigns right now, and the DCCC should not be contributing to that debasement." Far from heading only into targeted districts where Democrats clearly stand to pick up House seats, Sanders' trip includes a stop through an area, Lubbock County, where Trump carried 2/3 of the vote over Hillary Clinton in 2016. Traveling to more than half the states in the country since then, working with a range of organizing organizations and causes, Sanders has made a point of hitting heavily conservative territory, including multiple visits to heavily Trump-backing states like West Virginia and Kentucky. He is not the only progressive with potential national ambitions to swing through such territory, as Democrats aim to rebuild the party or build goodwill in such areas. Former Vice President Joe Biden has recently scheduled swings through Montana, North Dakota, and Indiana. Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper will soon swing through Idaho. New Jersey Senator Cory Booker has in the last few weeks stopped in Alabama and Mississippi, and Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren and Representative Seth Moulton have both made a point of popping up in Texas as of late. Yet Sanders' trip comes as he has also intensified his considerations of a potential 2020 campaign. In January, he convened his top aides to strategize over what a run would look like, and he has been systematically working to plug political holes that dogged him in 2016, shoring up ties with party and union leaders while studying foreign policy. Plus, in addition to his travel to less conventional destinations for Democrats, he has visited both Iowa and New Hampshire, the first presidential primary states, multiple times. China, Russia supportive of Trump's North Korea meeting. President Donald Trump's announced plan to meet with the North Korean leader, Kim Jong Un, has received a warm reception from China and Russia, the two major nations with the closest ties to the otherwise isolated communist state. A spokesman for the Chinese Foreign Ministry, Jing Shuang, said on Friday that his nation was hopeful that all parties to the talks would show their political courage, according to the Associated Press, and that China supported positive inter-Korean and U.S.-North Korea interactions. China has long served as North Korea's chief trade partner and benefactor on the world stage, until recently shielding it from the most aggressive actions sought by the U.S. and others at the United Nations. Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, traveling in Ethiopia, told the AP that the Kremlin considered the Trump-Kim meeting a step in the right direction. An agreement between the U.S. and North Korea, he said, is necessary for normalizing the situation around the Korean peninsula. The White House's confirmation on Thursday night that Trump would meet with Kim in the coming months came as somewhat of a surprise to even members of his own administration, breaking with precedent that kept U.S. presidents from meeting leaders of the repressive nation. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson told reporters on Friday in Africa that he and other officials were caught off guard by Kim's willingness to meet. What changed was his posture in a fairly dramatic way that in all honesty came as a little bit of a surprise to us, as well, that he was so forward-leaning, Tillerson said while speaking during a visit to Djibouti. The remarks from the nation's top diplomat came just a day after he expressed skepticism over the likelihood of a summit between the U.S. and North Korea, telling reporters in Ethiopia that negotiations between the two nations were a long ways away. As North Korea ramped up its campaign of missile tests and nuclear saber-rattling, Trump has sought to ramp up pressure on the country's leadership with the help of China, which wields a disproportionate amount of influence with North Korea as its principal trading partner. China has agreed to tougher sanctions on North Korea in recent months, and Jing said Friday that the Chinese government would continue to strive for the political resolution and lasting peace and stability on the peninsula. Susan Rice, who served as National Security Advisor and U.S. Ambassador to the UN under President Barack Obama, expressed skepticism that Trump could successfully pull off the high-wire act of meeting with Kim, which she said would require significant preparation and input from experts who she said had fled government service. Rice warned that, handled poorly, a face-to-face meeting between Trump and Kim could increase the risk of armed conflict between the U.S. and North Korea. We also have the challenge of the fact that we have a president who hasn't conducted a successful negotiation domestically or internationally, who doesn't seem to like to prepare or be detail-oriented and who has a quite hollowed-out stable of experts now, both at the State Department and elsewhere in the administration, she told MSNBC's Andrea Mitchell. And so there's a real risk, I'm afraid, that if we dash into this without proper preparation, the president himself tries to conduct a substantive negotiation without the benefit of experts, that we could well fail, and in the context of failure, I think the risk of conflict increases. Rice suggested that for Trump to be successful, he should lean on North Korea experts regardless of the administration they served and potentially seek to press them back into government service as part of an advisory team. The meeting itself, she said, should be informal and without the pomp that typically accompanies a summit-level meeting of world leaders. Should the initial meeting go well, a more formal handshake summit could follow. I think it's very risky, she said. It risks the president's credibility, the credibility of the United States, and worse still, I think it increases the risk of conflict. If they go into something with very high expectations, poor preparation, and the president acting in his typically mercurial way, we could end up in a much worse place than we are today. I do think this is high risk, if it's executed in the typical Trumpian fashion. If, however, the president has the presence of mind and the confidence in his team to allow this to be done responsibly and effectively, then I think it's worth attempting and the downsides can be potentially mitigated. John Bolton, a U.S. ambassador to the UN and Undersecretary of State for President George W. Bush, said in a Friday afternoon interview with Fox News that Trump had called Kim's bluff by accepting the invitation to meet. He suggested that Kim had proposed the meeting as a stall tactic, assuming that such a face-to-face would be preceded by months of preparatory work, during which North Korea could complete work on a nuclear weapon capable of striking the U.S. Bolton, whose name has reportedly been circulated as a successor to National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster, said the chances of a diplomatic solution that results in the North's abandoning its nuclear weapon program were pretty remote, but that those chances increase in direct proportion to their fear that Trump might be prepared to use military force. Bolton suggested accelerating the timetable for Trump's meeting with Kim so that it occurred before the end of March, and he went so far as to suggest that it be held in the same UN room in Geneva where then Secretary of State James Baker met with the Iraqi foreign minister in 1991, days before the start of the Persian Gulf War. Kim Jong Un should sit in that room and think about what it means to play around with an American president, Bolton said. The way the president ought to address it is to say, well, I'm delighted to be here, wherever it turns out to be, to talk about how we're going to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula and North Korea specifically. So let's get to cases right away. What ports should American freighters sail into and what air bases should American cargo planes land at so that we can dismantle your nuclear weapons program, put it in those planes and boats and sail it back to America to put it at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, which is where the Libyan nuclear weapons program now lives, Bolton said. That's the kind of conversation we should have with Kim Jong Un. And if that's not what he's prepared to talk about, it could be a very short meeting. Former Governor Bill Richardson of New Mexico, a former U.S. ambassador to the UN and Energy Secretary, who has made 8 trips to North Korea, told CNN on Friday that he was overwhelmed by what is happening but was nonetheless hopeful that a Trump-Kim meeting could jumpstart an overall warming of relations between the U.S. and North Korea. Richardson urged lower-level meetings between the nations in the coming weeks to take some soft power steps, like freeing U.S. citizens currently detained in North Korea and recovering the remains of American soldiers killed during the Korean War, before the two big guns meet in 2 months. He said he did not expect a grand deal on denuclearization to come from the first meeting between Kim and Trump and that any such deal would almost certainly come at a high price. Still, he said, he was concerned, yet at the same time hopeful. I'm on the side of the big gamble, because, you know, the North Korean situation, the tension in the peninsula has been so intense, he said. This is the worst state of U.S.-North Korea relations, that you almost need a Hail Mary pass. You need a home run thrown into the mix. Senator Marco Rubio, Republican Florida, who sits on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, was somewhat less optimistic in an interview with CBS this morning in which he posited that Kim may be willing to meet with Trump only because the North Korean nuclear program has progressed to the point where Kim feels he can negotiate with the U.S. from a position of strength. Less likely but also possible, Rubio said, is that Kim's interest in negotiations with Trump is an attempt to appease other power players in North Korea who have grown unhappy with the nation's direction. Key to the negotiations, Rubio said, will be North Korea's willingness to end its nuclear program. Without that willingness, the Florida lawmaker said, the Kim government's interest in negotiations could amount to little more than an attempt to undermine international opposition to Pyongyang by framing Kim as a reasonable negotiator and Trump as unreasonable for rejecting requests that Rubio said the U.S. could never accept, such as removing its troops from South Korea. Japan's Prime Minister, Shinzo Abe, told the AP that he and Trump spoke on the phone and agreed to continue the U.S.-led campaign of international sanctions intended to pressure North Korea into abandoning its nuclear arsenal. Abe said he would visit the U.S. in April to hold talks with Trump. And Sweden, which is one of a handful of nations to maintain diplomatic relations with North Korea and has represented U.S. interests in Pyongyang, offered to help facilitate the meeting between Trump and Kim. Prime Minister Stefan Löfven told the AP on Friday that he hoped the dialogue between the two would be smooth. Trump himself has at times ratcheted up tensions with North Korea, pledging last summer to attack it with fire and fury like the world has never seen if it continued its nuclear provocations, but also expressing a willingness last May to meet with Kim. Christiana Lima contributed to this report.